Coming up, why Cam Thomas's season, the development of one Jalen Wilson, and the emergence of Noah Clowney means so much more than just young talent. It's also about the offseason ahead. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Armbrecht, no Doug Norrie, but as always, we thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And where we're going today is where we will be spending a lot of our time in this offseason, talking about the future for the Brooklyn Nets. And we know that Cam Thomas, for whatever reasons the organization had, whether or not there were disagreements in the background, he finally had the opportunity to and has showcased why he can be such a high-level talent, especially on the offensive end of the court this year. We know that a older rookie, second-round pick in Jalen Wilson was brought in here with the expectations of having a reasonably solid floor, even if a slightly capped ceiling, and we've gotten our opportunity to see him develop. Now, even if it's only going to be a somewhat limited sample size at the back end of the year, Noah Clowney is seeing the court. We can only speculate if we would have gotten some Dariq Whitehead had he been healthy and able to get out there for the Nets. Wouldn't be hard to make the assumption that we would have seen him as well. And on the one hand, there's the very simple fact here. We're going to talk about veteran players, off-season decisions, potential trades, and what it could mean for the draft later in this offseason for Brooklyn. But it'd be very easy and should be something that fans champion here coming out of this season. And we alluded to it over the last couple of games, getting to see more Noah Clowney, how it doesn't take a lot for the fan base to get excited, to re-engage with the team and re-engage with what can be a little bit of optimism, even in a bad season. And Cam Thomas, obviously, when this is all said and done, assuming that we get 3 more games out of him here, you're going to be talking about 66 games on the season. You're going to be talking about 51 games starting. So you can already start to think forward to the next season and where those numbers are going to go, assuming health. He did have an injury over the course of this season that held him out a handful of times. But Cam Thomas emerged this year and gave you all of the stats that many would suggest were always ready to be there, if only the Nets could get out of their own way. And by the end of this year, too, for him specifically, we're going to be able to look back and say, a guy that's going to average over 31 minutes a night, he took 18 shots a game, 44 from the field, almost 36% from beyond the arc, has seen some of these real spurts here. When we look back and we talk about only averaging 3 assists on the season, that's not going to look as bright as it should, given the way the last month of the year went for him as well, right? So a 22-point score, first time we've been able to see this. When you think back, even over his first 2 years, it's so misleading to see 67 games, 57 games played, right? If you said over his first 2 seasons, he played 124 games. You go, okay, well, 82 game season. He's a young player, rookie. Maybe he get a lot of run that first year. No, he appears in a lot, but only the 6 starts, right? Only averaging 16, 17 minutes. And even though, he did do 1-to-1 essentially here, and maybe even a little bit more, going from 17 and 16 minutes per night and 7 and 8 shot attempts per game. Yeah, if you go ahead and almost double those numbers, he's actually going to more than double his output in terms of the volume. But this isn't just about Cam Thomas. It's also about looking at Jalen Wilson and understanding that when you take a player at his age in the second round, you look at the skill set, you look at the NBA ready body, and you set a certain level of expectations. Now, me personally, I would have said I wanted to see him sooner rather than later. And honestly, another player that we're going to throw in here too is going to be Trendon Watford. And shame on me for not saying his name right there at the top of all of this, because he is a young player. He is potentially a part of the core going forward, and he has put forth a really impressive season, even if it took a little bit of time getting there. So when we think about Jalen Wilson, before we get into not only Trendon Watford, but also Noah Clowney. When you think about Jalen Wilson, you at least need to know and confirm that he's the kind of player that can be an NBA rotation player over the course of an 82 game season. And even though his 3-point shooting has obviously come down over the back end of this year, I said how many games I want to see him play in. I would have preferred, boy, I have to go back and actually find this. I think I had him, oh man, it might have been 45. Like when we set the over under on it, he'll come up a little bit short of that 40 games played when it's all said and done. But you have to like the fact that by the end of this season, he'll have played 14 and a half minutes per game on average. Now, only 5 points. It doesn't feel like that's a really good sample size or something to get excited about. But 43, 44% from the field, even in the slump that he's seen down the back end of this season here, still going to end up being close to maybe over 35% from deep. So there are a lot of things to like here, including the free throw shooting, which I know is such a little footnote to this, but it actually does matter because when you're knocking out 82% from the free throw line, when you're knocking down some kind of clutch buckets down the stretch of games, especially as well, and getting some closing minutes here, as this season has obviously no longer holding the value of making the playoffs, making the play-in tournament, but still has value in showcasing what your fortitude is, right? What you're capable of and where you can be trusted by the coaching staff moving forward. So an impressive season for him, confirming what we thought. High floor, ready to be a contributor. We'll see what the ceiling ultimately ends up being. He does become pretty fascinating as we work our way towards the off season as well. Now, I mentioned Trendon Watford's name and I mentioned Noah Clowney's name. We're kind of doing the both and here, right? Cam Thomas has been a name on the lips of Nets fans for multiple seasons now. Rookie Jalen Wilson. Trendon Watford recently acquired, but he's been in the league for a couple of years now and is starting to maybe show that little bit of what's below the surface in terms of consistency and his role going forward. Then we get the other rookie in Noah Clowney. So in a moment here, I want to talk about both those players, different sample sizes, how it sets the baseline, and ultimately what that can mean for informing this offseason and helping, whether it's Sean Marks, whether you want it to be Sean Marks, helping to inform how they can make smart decisions this offseason as it relates to veterans, guys on one-year deals, and potentially players like Dorian Finney-Smith, who we believe should be even closer and pushing well over the edge of that trade market. We'll get into that coming up here in just one moment. Before we do, tell you about our friends over at Gametime. I mentioned this the other day, trying to get to a baseball game. I grew up a Yankees fan. I wanted to share that with my nephew. And then you get over there and you're trying to find the good tickets. You're trying to find the good prices. You're trying to know where you're going to be sitting, right? You want it to be a great experience. And it just isn't easy enough unless you go use Gametime, because they are now an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch, with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, which I need to be able to see, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Oh, guys, I said the last minute ticket deals, yeah, but also flash deals, zone deals going on. Easy to find and buy MLB tickets for every kind of event inside of your area, and the views from the seats and the venues. This is not just MLB. We've told you about it for NBA. We've told you about it for NFL. You can also do it if you're going to a concert. You can also do it if you're going to the theater, right? If you can think of an event in your area, Gametime likely has you covered. And that lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all are covered there with Gametime. So you know that you get the last minute ticket deals. That's up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy shows, theater, and so much more. And not to mention that if you get over there right now, you take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, so as we continue this discussion, let's also now talk about one player who's been in the league a little bit, first year with the Nets and Trendon Watford, and then a rookie, and one player who's giving you a larger sample size, and one player is giving you a smaller, right? We're kind of working our way down the hierarchy in terms of what we got across the course of this season. So we think about Trendon Watford here, just first and foremost, because he's a funny one. We talked a handful of games ago, going back a couple of weeks on the show. Yeah, he's kind of a bull in a china shop at times. You love the energy, you love the hustle. We talk about the little exchange with Schroeder and how that felt weird just because if of all the things to have, finally boil over to a little bit of a rough exchange, even though it was nothing too substantial, that was it. A missed pass going out of bounds in a game where you're kind of getting blown out. But that's the nature of seasons like this. If you think about Trendon Watford and you have to go back and remember the way we discussed him coming in, 2 years in Portland, right? 48 games and 62 games played, only 22 combined starts over the course of that season. Now, by the way, 0 starts this year for the Brooklyn Nets. The minutes down coming into Brooklyn. It's interesting to think back to how I viewed him and thought he could grow into a role for himself. The consistency never really showed up here for him over the course of the year. However, what you do like is that the consistency from the field was still there, 53.5%. The consistency from beyond the arc, even though only averaging 1 attempt per game, 40% from beyond the arc, right? So continue to come back to the well here and show that you can do it. And here's another one that I really liked. Same kind of volume, even though actually technically on a per 36-minute basis, all these numbers would go up a bit for him. Free throw attempts, 2, 1.5, only 1.4 free throw attempts this year. 83% from the line. So, we've always thought about some of the players and the best players that have been on this roster. Nicholas Claxton comes to mind. These late game moments, Ben Simmons when he was healthy, need guys that you can trust to go to the line and make those free throws that make it harder for defenses to just commit those easy fouls. Hey, these are all little boxes that you start to check here with him. Gave you almost 3 rebounds per game, averaged a little over 6.5 points per game. And just to go that brief layer deeper on him, obviously, we know that in more recent games, we can feel even a little bit more bullish about him, right? In the month of April here, he bookended it so far in these first 4 games, 21-point performance against the Pacers, 16 points against the Kings. Yes, it's a 30-point loss, so it's not like we can get overly elated about it. But then you go back to the end of March where he strung together 4 consecutive double-digit scoring performances, gave you rebounds, 7, 5, 8. The assist numbers bubbled up a little bit. So there were some of these things that when we went and watched tape on him, we got excited about because you think, hey, it could translate. And then the opening, the opportunity, right? A little bit of ball handling, a little bit of size. Now, you got it kind of early. And one of the things that I think applies to this team overall and the way we think about different players, because we're going to talk about some guys here that may not be a part of this unit going forward beyond this season, is even though the firing of Jock Vaughn is right, and even though the firing of Jock Vaughn seems like the pound of flesh, it and you wouldn't think because the coaching staff stayed intact and Kevin Ollie just moved into the interim role that it really wouldn't change much in terms of the way players are used, but it did because Kevin Ollie, to his credit, at least started exploring more options, right? Looked at some different lineups. And it's something that we thought, whether or not it would have made a difference had Jock Vaughn tried to do some different things, I think maybe he would have survived a little bit longer. Good or bad, right? Right, wrong, and different. Maybe he would have stuck around a little bit longer. So Kevin Ollie has seemingly approached this with the mindset in a good way that, hey, if I'm going to be here beyond this season, if I'm going to get a 1-year contract to stick around, as maybe Doug Norrie speculated when we were talking with Jack Manuel from Brooklyn Buzz, if that's a possibility, then I need to confirm some things about the players that I can utilize and the roles that they can fill for me. So Trendon Watford, though, maybe some of these ebbs and flows, doesn't necessarily get the consistency of minutes that he wants, got a little bit more of it here down the stretch, and I think did a really nice job for himself with it. Then we get to the guy that we've talked about in recent episodes, obviously, Noah Clowney, 19-year-old kid, certainly showing you some really nice things here down the stretch. Now, we came out of the last game talking about the weekend in totality, and sometimes this I think gets lost, and it's not a problem if you think it's over the skis to say, hey, Noah Clowney has really showcased that he can be a player for this team. We used it on our last episode, titling it, Noah Clowney has arrived. Now, you want to go ahead and get in the weeds on arrived and what the definition of that should be. Okay, fine. Like, I'm not really interested in going down that road. What I am interested in looking at is a player that we were not sure would show up here in the NBA. And had this season gone a little bit better from an NBA level for this team, had they been a little bit more competitive, maybe we wouldn't have. I don't know, right? Would his developmental track have actually been this extra bench spark that the team could have utilized trying to push towards the play-in tournament. He's not going to make a difference in terms of wins and losses over the course of the year, but it matters for how we think about him going forward. At the end of it all, yeah, he's going to end up playing 23 games here. Got his first start. Maybe he picks up a couple of more, ideally 3 more if you're me. I mean, it's just nuts, right? So across 23 games, he'll average 13 minutes. He'll knock down 53% of his shots. He'll give you 39. Listen, run a little bit hot here. He could close out this season hitting 40% from beyond the arc at the NBA level. That really matters. 68% from the free throw line. That's a solid enough number, especially relative to some of the other players that even though the positions are fluid, he's going to be utilized sometimes at the 4, sometimes at the 5. Yeah, that matters. Got put into tough matchups against players like Sabonis. That matters just for the experience of it all. So you sit here and talk about averaging 5 points across 13 minutes. You don't have to really squint too much here. And the totals, by the way, getting 68 shots up across this 23 attempts from beyond the arc. If he's going to take 2 to 3 more per game over these final games, he'll end up getting up over 30 attempts from deep. That's significant for a player that effectively, up until the very end here, has not been getting any run of any substance with the NBA level squad. And he'll score over 100 points. I mean, I know it's all in the margins here, but it's really important for the Brooklyn Nets, for Sean Marks, if he's going to be the GM, to go ahead and as this season winds down, and we can debate about it, the sample sizes should have been bigger, and in most cases they should have been. But all of a sudden, you sit here and you say, okay, Cam Thomas, there you go. You talk about the definition of arrived. Cam Thomas has arrived. Jalen Wilson has established that he does have NBA rotation value. Trendon Watford has established that he can be a rotation value player for you. Noah Clowney has established that he can be on the NBA roster day 1, game 1 next year, ready to contribute to this team. So those are 4 young players that are all going to be a part of the decision-making process as we hit this offseason. And coming out of just this draft class, Jalen Wilson, Noah Clowney, Dariq Whitehead, TBD, and unfortunately another injury for him, but hopefully we get good returns over the summer and getting towards training camp. All of a sudden, you now have 4 players in place for different reasons and different values that can greatly inform the decision-making process as Sean Marks gets to this offseason. Coming up next, let's talk about that. Not at the highest possible of levels, though we'll give a nod to star hunting and what the goals of this organization may be. But what about decision making? What about guys on 1-year contracts? What about a player like Dorian Finney-Smith and being capable and comfortable to move on from him, even if the draft capital is not where you think it should be? We'll get into all of those conversations in just one moment. This next segment is brought to you by BetterHelp. Listen, sometimes we need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. So it's important to let that out, especially to someone who is unbiased to your life. I've said this to you before, talking about whether it's career changes, making decisions about moving, sometimes losing, as we did, a beloved pet in the family. All of these things come up, and it doesn't have to be negative. It can be positive moments in your life, but trying to navigate through them and understand them is really important. That's why when you talk about BetterHelp, it's about therapy that can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than just about our favorite sports teams and whether or not they're winning enough games. It's your time to start thinking about therapy, and you need to be giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule, and you can visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. All right, so as we close out the conversation about why these players performing well, why these samples matter for the Brooklyn Nets, let's talk about that offseason. So we mentioned all these players, mentioned all these names. So we already know one thing for sure, and we could argue that we thought we were going to know it sooner with Cam Thomas and should have known it sooner. Okay, great. But now we know for sure he can be a 20-plus point scorer. Now we know for sure, regardless of the ultimate goal of wanting to be a team that can compete and win championships, we have a player that if you give him maybe a superstar this offseason on this team, that if you surround him with more consistency in scoring, he's going to be able to excel. That is a great box to have checked here. We talk about Jalen Wilson and being able to be a contributor. Now, to what extent? We'll have to wait and see on that. I think Trendon Watford is actually above him in terms of the pecking order about what you think the game over game value is going to be going into next season. But even those two players alone specifically, when we think about this roster and we think about the moves not made, like Dorian Finney-Smith, you have to start to feel more and more comfortable. And you actually put Noah Clowney into this group now as well, about going to this offseason and saying, hey, whatever the market is going to be, we need to make a decision here, right? They made the decision on Royce O'Neal. They could have held on to him because they didn't feel like they were going to get enough market value back. Okay. But at some point, you just have to acknowledge that the value is not going to get much higher than where it has been. And it may never reach the bar that you set for it. Dorian Finney-Smith will be 31 years old next year. He's coming over. Now, a year ago when he comes over, after all the trades, 26 games, 26 starts, plays almost 28 minutes. He only shoots, by the way, 35% from the field, 31% from beyond the arc, gives you a little over 7 points per game, 5 rebounds, a little over 1.5 assists, right? And here's actually my point too, because we'll do a whole other episode where we talked about someone had asked, grade out the roster. And I went ahead and I did that. And meeting expectations, I believe that Dorian Finney-Smith did meet expectations this year. And I got some pushback on that. But I'm sorry. Go back and look at those 26 games and then look at this year. 68 games, 56 starts, 28.5 minutes per game, 42% from the field, 35% from beyond the arc. And by the way, 35% from beyond the arc, yeah, it's what he was doing at the start of the 22-23 season in Dallas. Yes, the 2 years before that, he hit over 39%. But that, those are actually outliers. 2019, 2020, and 2021-22. Those 3 seasons, that's his sweet spot. 37.5, 39.5, 39.5% from beyond the arc. The 3 years leading up to that was under 30% and then 31%. So, regressing to the mean or regressing to the average and not having a Luka on your roster, I was not surprised that we turn around and see 8.5 points per game from him, almost 5 rebounds per game, and the exact same assist average from the 26 game sample size from a year ago. That's it. And I don't knock him. A lot of times we talk about these players and say, Mikal Bridges, right? We've been hard on him, but it's just because he's slotting himself right back to where he's supposed to be as a player. And we sometimes over-evaluate and set too high of expectations. That's what I think the fan base has done with Dorian Finney-Smith. And it's actually a part of the reason why I think that seeing these other young players step up is a good sign, because it means we can move away now from Dorian Finney-Smith and take whatever value is available. So when we're talking about somebody playing, small ball 5, playing at the 4, okay, you need some defensive value and you also need some offensive perimeter shooting. Well, we mentioned these players, right? Noah Clowney can give you the small ball 5 or regular 5, however you want to frame it. He can play at the 4. We've seen him playing with Claxton down the stretch here. You know that Jalen Wilson gives you, you're going to want to bump him down closer to the 3 than to the 4. And even though Trendon Watford's not a defensive player by any stretch, again, the offensive value, the ball handling. So you're getting a little bit more athletic here, right? Get more athletic, get younger, and make it possible when you go to this offseason, you just say, Dorian Finney-Smith, whatever we thought at the trade deadline, we have now confirmed that we have 3 viable players that help factor into our rotations, and it makes it easy. Dallas, you want Dorian Finney-Smith back? Okay, let's talk about it. Let's get into where we think we could slot in, because there's a lot of things coming. The grades are coming here for this one from me as we work our way into the offseason. We're also going to talk about the thing that everyone keeps saying, oh, it's such a bad draft class. Oh, who cares about it? I'll tell you right now, they have Cody Williams going from Colorado to the Houston Rockets with the 9th overall pick in the mock draft, taking our pick. Go watch some highlights on him. Just see if you like the athletic length and the ability to attack at the rim and some of his perimeter shooting, where his 3-point percentages are and what that might suggest for his NBA career. And even beyond that, because I'm not talking about going out and trading Dorian Finney-Smith for a lottery pick. I'm talking about being in the back end of the first round somewhere, maybe, or maybe being at the top of the second round. There are players there. Whether you want to take a look at Hunter Salas, whether you want to look at some of the bigger guys, Eddie is up there. He's talking about being the Toronto 31 kind of range in a lot of these mocks. There are a handful of names. Jalen Tyson, the 6'7 guard that right now is going to go 34 to the San Antonio Spurs, right? There are names. And you know what you don't get to do is evaluate the rookies or the talent that you didn't have any draft picks to go get. And I think that that's okay, because the other factor here is moving off of the money of Dorian Finney-Smith. And that's what brings us to having to make a choice about Nicholas Claxton as well. Now, he's younger. He falls into this group of young core players. I actually find it very intriguing when you watch him with with Clowney on the court. That dynamic, I think, offers you something here. Would it be the sexiest combination to say we're going to have a version of Claxton, Sharp, and Clowney next season? Listen, you're going to suffer in some areas the same way that Claxton and Day'Ron Sharp have always suffered. And Day'Ron Sharp has been a little bit regressed here, it feels like, down the back end of the season. But at least you feel like you have a new component that makes playing Claxton more viable in totality, right? Because now the pieces around them feel like they can all mix and match a little bit better here for you. So inform, right? Inform the decisions you're going to make if you want to keep Claxton around. If you choose not to, well, then even though he doesn't occupy a ton of money right now, you combine that with Dorian Finney-Smith, and suddenly you're starting to create a little bit of cap relief that you know you're going to need while you still have Ben Simmons on the slate going into next season. The other thing for me here too, because it's not just about the players that played well, it's also about a couple of other guys. Now, me personally, I like Dennis Smith Jr. I like the attitude that he brings. I like the tenacity, right? But I think in the spectrum of players that I was high or low on in the offseason, the moves the Nets made, I was high on Trendon Watford. Then I allowed myself to get a little bit dissuaded. And thankfully, I've come back up on him. And he's brought up my perspective on him at the end of the year. I was a little bit higher on Dennis Smith Jr. The one thing we knew, though, was injuries. And so now we know that that's just a part of who his NBA career has been. What his NBA career has been, I should say. After that first season where he played in Dallas, 69 games played, 69 games started, look at it right now. 32, 21, 34, 3. And it actually goes over, that same year. 20 with Detroit, 37 in Portland, 54, nice big year for him in Charlotte, and then 56 this season. But it's just 326 games played in going back to 2017-18. Missing games and missing time is just going to be a factor for him. And it's unfortunate. But you have to think about the fact that we're talking about a guy that's only getting 50% of his games across his career. Marginally, yeah, pretty much. He's pretty much 50% availability. Now, some of that can be about his role and starting, not starting, but injuries have played a consistent factor. So you feel like, okay, maybe we're going to end up moving on from him. That's confirmation. That's a good thing. Same thing with Lonnie Walker. He's a little bit more interesting here because pre-Kevin Ollie, when it was still Jock Vaughn, it just seemed like Lonnie Walker had a clear role. Once Kevin Ollie got in there, and we've heard him say it, hey, I need more than just shooters. I need more than just pure scorers. I need guys that are going to play at both ends. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to be perfect or pretty or that you're going to be a lockdown defender, but you need to be able to do more. Now, in April here already, 20 minutes, 11 minutes, 25 minutes. So they've ramped him back up here at the end of the season, but he really did slip down the pecking order. Scored double digits to start off April. Hadn't been in a game mostly enough, right? 3, 7, 9, 12 minutes down the stretch of March. Had not scored double digits prior to April 1st, going all the way back to March 7th against Detroit. We're in 29 minutes, 8 of 18, 5 of 14 from deep. But right there, even in and of itself, there were games this season when he had to do things offensively because how bereft of talent the Nets are on that side of the ball. And then other games where you feel like, hey, this can't just be a huck it and chuck it. I thought that I would be higher on him by the end of this. If you go star hunting this offseason, these players have different values for you. But if you don't go that route, you've gotten some more confirmation on who fits where. Now, the only hard part about all of this in the players that we're talking about in terms of the young talent, Cam Thomas, Noah Clowney, Jalen Wilson, Trendon Watford. Well, Cam Thomas is the only guy living in the backcourt there, right? Dennis Smith Jr., you'd like to be in that backcourt with him. He's another young player. But it doesn't look like that's necessarily going to be a viable or reliable option. So now you get to go back to this offseason, potentially, look at the free agency and talk about getting another margin guy. How do we now build this thing out? The final note that I'll remind everybody on this is when you make those superstar trades, you're trying to get as much value as you possibly can out of it, right? Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, a ton of picks, Dorian Finney-Smith. right? Picks, but it doesn't mean that it's the right complement of pieces. So now when you're drafted talent, and every one of these guys that we talked about, those four guys, I mean, three guys are drafted talent, Trendon Watford, Nicholas Claxton, if you want to keep him in the mix here, you're a drafted talent. So what is your vision of this team? Now go and supplement that. And that can end up being veterans. The Dorian Finney-Smith, when I talk about him, hey, trade him for a draft pick or trade him where you get another player back that better complements what you want to accomplish. So it's really important to have young players down the stretch of the season confirm or deny how you feel about them, confirm or deny what their role can be going forward, and inform how you tackle the offseason. Whether that's the highest level, going after superstars or big name hunting, or going through the draft, trying to get even more assets, right? And maybe even making rebuilding decisions. That can also be defined by what we saw down the end of this season. That being the case, couple of things. One, get over to YouTube, turn on the alerts, obviously, subscribe over there, tell your friends, get us on the podcast feed exclusively. The Jack Manuel from Brooklyn Buzz 2-part conversation only lives over on the podcast feed because we were doing a connected one, couldn't set it up for YouTube. Shout out to Clash Bandicoot for reminding me to remind you that lives on the podcast feed. It's a very fun conversation. Go check it out. We are going to obviously be back on the post game on Wednesday night, but we're also going to be doing our player grades at the end of the season. We're going to be talking about players to watch in the play-in tournament. Are there free agents to think about, low-cost guys that maybe fit what the Nets need in this offseason? And then we're also going to take a look at the big picture stuff, hierarchy of where you want to go, how much do you want to spend. So all these things as we're winding down the season for the Nets, ramping up towards the play-in tournament, ramping up towards the NBA playoffs. We have a ton of stuff that we are really, really excited to get in on with all you guys. So be sure to connect with us on all those great platforms. That being the case, as you know, when there is no Doug Norrie, there is no quote, short of saying that I miss my friend and I can't wait till he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball, 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 basketball. Yeah.